Kansas lawmakers introduced two bills aimed to decriminalize marijuana.
While previous attempts have failed, the legislation this year has some major differences. Sophia Grunander joins us from the newsroom to break down these bills. Sophia.
Mike and Rachel, these are two separate bills. One decriminalizes marijuana for recreational use and the other legalizes marijuana for medical purposes. But both include provisions that would return 40% of the revenue to the people of Kansas. The bills are sponsored by 19 Democrats from the Kansas House, including Representative Fort Carr from Wichita. I spoke with Carr earlier today, and he tells me that both bills would establish the cannabis industry, which is estimated to give the state between $750 million and $1 billion in revenue each year. This isn't any different from previous legislation, but what is different is that 40% of that revenue would be returned to Kansans. Representative Carr says that this money would be used to address various concerns, such as child care, homelessness, and property taxes.
Those carve-outs are set in stone. You know, that's where these funds will go. They will go back to the people. It's the residents that need the help. You know, the state has been able to maintain itself.
Senate President Ty Masterson has previously stated that marijuana will not be decriminalized as long as he is in power, so the bills face an uphill battle. But Representative Carr believes that these changes will help to gain support from other Republican lawmakers.